Many thanks for staying tuned. You're still watching Political Spectrum, brought to you by Spectrum Television. We've been discussing events that transpired on the May Day celebration and how Nigerian workers have been able to sort of inspire themselves despite the realities, many myriads of realities of the economy on ground. How they've been able to stay afloat despite the fact that they have to deal with what some people consider as a really meager minimum wage. And joining us on the show this morning to speak on some of these issues is, of course, a social political commentator and a good governance advocate in the person of Dr. Wisdom Enang. Doctor, you're welcome on the social.
Thank you very much, Xavier.
Yes, the event culminating to the May Day celebration was, of course, heralded by different leaders from different sects of the society. And a lot of people find it very pleasing that the Nigerian workers, despite the myriads of issues they're grappling with at this time, somehow still muster up enough inspiration, enough motivation to still carry on with all their dutiful tasks on a daily basis, despite what all the inimical situations they have to deal with on a daily basis. What does May Day really represent to Nigerian workers?
I think May Day for the Nigerian workers is it's a day for a reflection on the sort of values that the Nigerian workers hold dearly. It's a time for the Nigerian workers to reflect positively on what they've been able to achieve, and most so what they think could be improved as we look into a much brighter future. So, really, those are the times to sort of reflect. We've been able to achieve a lot because for us to become one of the greatest contributors to the African economy, it means that our workforce have done tremendously very well. But it is also important for us to reflect on what we could do better and how we could do it and what the government can help in that regard as we move into the future.
All right, Doctor. Well, yesterday's event saw a lot of commentators and indeed labor leaders speaking to the leadership of President Bola Tinubu on the realities on ground as regards the new minimum wage structure. But first, let's look at what the federal government said. It said that the new minimum wage structure would go into effect from the first day of May. And this is devoid of whatever would be the outcome of the decision of the tripartite committee that was set up by the presidency. But then, what do you make of this proclamation by the federal government?
To be honest, you've got to help me here. The new minimum wage, what is the value that we finally agreed?
It hasn't been decided on, Doctor. The tripartite committee is still working on it. But then we have information from Edo State where the Governor Baseki, has approved 70,000 naira to be paid as minimum wage to the workers of the state, up from 40,000 naira. So speculations are that whatever would be decided may be hovering around the 65,000, 70,000 benchmark. But so far, the tripartite committee set up by the Tinubu-led administration has not decided on the actual figure that would be the new minimum wage to be paid workers. But the federal government is saying that it is going to go ahead to implement whatever the new minimum wage would be at the end of the day from the first day of May. And people are trying to understand how the federal government intends to make this work.
Okay, so in my mind, those pronouncements are a bit too early. The reason I'm going to say this is, Robert, Xavier, you've got to understand that inflation, we're in a super inflation situation. And one of the things that you know from basic economics is that inflation is primarily when you have so much money chasing less productivity. Now, the problem that I have is this: the moment you start having an increased minimum wage, in some regards, the chances are that you are putting out more money into circulation, and you're going to, reduce the value of money ultimately, and you're going to, at the same time, increase inflation. So the question is that a smart thing to do, to say you're going to sort of increase your minimum wage in retrospect without knowing the value? Because that informs the target, really. For example, if we're saying we're going to 70K, we're told that we're going to tame inflation by the end of 2024. It might be smart to say, okay, we're going to 70K per month for minimum wage, but we are going to put it to take effect on the 1st of January 2025, at which point we do expect that the inflation would have been tamed. But to go back in the middle of an inflation and put it in retrospect, it might become counterproductive. And at the same time, it does sound more like a political, decision, more than an economic and a logical decision.
All right, Doctor. Well, the labor leaders also had a couple of things to say as regards what they would want to be the acceptable minimum wage to be paid workers in the country. Now, they are of the opinion that workers should be paid 615,000 naira. This is according to the labor unions, that's the NLC led by Joe Ajaero, and of course the TUC led by Festus Osifo. And they are of the opinion that 615,000 naira should be the minimum wage paid. I guess the labor leaders are taking into consideration the issues of inflation, as you have pointed out. Or what would you say is this amount that has been pegged by labor? Some quarters are calling it outrageous and not feasible.
Right. So the first thing is this: that doesn't take into account the inflation from a mitigative standpoint. That takes into account inflation from trying to say, well, there is inflation, how do we make sure people can afford this? But what the labor people do not understand is that each time you increase your salary rates and productivity is not concurrently increased, you're devaluing your money. And there's no way the naira would stand against the dollar the moment you get exchange the labor rates to be that high. That's the first thing they don't understand. The second thing that the labor people do not understand is that the moment that you're doing that, the inflation is going to go up. And so that money even becomes worse off. And I'll give you an example. If you're selling, say, for example, a product today for 10,000 naira, and the minimum wage is about, say, 30,000 for example. If you go all the way to 600,000, that product that was selling for 10,000 will now be selling for, say, 60, 70,000 because you have more inflation. So in a nutshell, you're having more money, but that money is actually losing value. And in a nutshell, we're not progressing from an economic standpoint. So the labor people clearly do not know how far you can go without, getting the rot of inflation and devaluation of your currency. So, and this is very important for us to always look at economic things, not from a sentimental standpoint. And Savior, you see, the point is the economic situation in Nigeria is not unique to Nigeria at all. If we take a cue from some of the economies that have done this and that have increased their minimum wage and their attendant effect on inflation, especially in the middle of a high inflation, we would know better. So, I mean, let's not argue this thing like a Nigerian thing. All we need to do is to take lessons learned from the regional players in the African region and the international players, and then we can understand exactly whether what we're advising the government to do is going to work or not. For now, I think a lot of the rhetoric are driven from just, sort of, uh, I'd like to say, an emotional standpoint, that that's not the way to take economic decisions.
Hmm. A lot of conversations have also been centered on what would be the fate of private enterprise workers, persons working within the private industry. What would be the consciousness of what would be their entitlements and pays as a result of these increments of minimum wage across the country at the federal and state levels of government. Do you think it is also important to incorporate the private sector workers into these implementations that the government is looking at? And then how would you advise it? Because it might seem or pose challenging for some private sector employers to want to buy into these increments across board.
I think you're absolutely spot on there. We need to even look at the macroeconomic outlook on the economy and ask ourselves, can some of the sectors, for example, the agricultural sector, which the margins are quite low, the manufacturing sector, can they actually afford such high figures? Because the last thing you want to do is to tilt the balance that creates this is kind of bad incentive for people who are looking at going into the private sector or different sectors for that matter. I do not believe, from the macroeconomic output, that a number of those private sectors can afford the high sort of six-figure recommended minimum wage. I do not believe that. And I think this is very important for the government to have a look critically. Well, I don't even think what the unions are saying would fly anyways, because it's counterproductive. I think that to go back to the drawing board, and I think the question I should be asking them is, the figure that you've postulated, on the worst and the best case scenario, what would be the impact on inflation? What would be the impact on our economic productivity? And what would also be the impact on, ultimately the devaluation or the appreciation of the Nigerian currency? Because fighting inflation, you've got to be very careful with the decisions you make. It could mar or make your economy. You could even go out of inflation, an inflationary situation, and go right back in again because of the policies that you're taking. So it is important to be careful, because even the best economies get tested when it comes to inflation. I'll give you an example. In Britain, for example, the inflation is quite high for the Western world. In Canada, for example, the inflation is also high, and some of it is because of the decisions that they've had to take. In the US as well, you remember when the COVID-19 hit, and they had to get stimulus, sort of packages and give it to different homes to stimulate the economy. Now, they did that, shed money around the economy, but what happened next was the inflation went up in the city. So you've got to be careful, right? And these are things that would happen if we do not pay the right attention to having a balance between the immediate increment in money and the ultimate value of the currency.
Okay. Another issue that I would want you to quickly address is some of the state governors are already preempting the federal government and moving a step ahead. A good example is the Edo State Governor, Governor Basiki, who has approved a 70,000 naira minimum wage. And although the Lagos State Governor, Sanwo-Olu, has not made a clear statement on that, but there are harsh comments as to efforts by the Lagos State government to also peg a minimum wage structure for its workers in light of the realities on the ground. But do you think the state governors at this time are spot on to sort of go ahead of the tripartite committee to peg these sums that they want to pay their workers, even when the constituted committee to look into what would be acceptable for the workers across the country have not decided yet what they would love to pay.
Well, Savior, I think the answer itself will be in the question and the circumstances around that answer. So I'll give you context. What is going on in those days? We're going to have elections. So are you surprised that that is coming into play? I'll leave you to answer the question. And when you answer it, you'll be clear if the decision is economically driven or politically driven.
So would you, in your words, would you think, or would you say that it's a politically driven decision by the government of Edo State to sort of influence the outcome of the Edo State government by making the people possibly think that the government got its welfare and needs at heart and wants to use this increment of the minimum wage to buy into their good books?
I think the best way to answer this question would be to say, if there is any economic reason I'd like to review that, in the absence of that, then I will be forced to go on the rhetoric of the political reason rather than economic. But if there's economic basis for which this has been done, it's important to bring that forward. And then let's review that. More so from a sustainability standpoint, and more so to see that there's been a wide range of consultation leading to this, both from the stakeholders in the government sector and those in the private sector, to say that this is an appropriate number that will work for both sides of the stakeholder divide. I think in the absence of that, the passage and the timing would allude to other probable reasons other than economics.
It is particularly interesting because, the Senator Adams Oshomole was speaking yesterday during a televised interview. He was of the opinion that what is playing out in Edo State is not new to Edo State, because he's simply saying that Governor Basiki is continuing from a long-standing tradition in Edo State, which was kick-started by him. You would understand that Edo State is indeed paying 40,000 naira minimum wage as against the 30,000 naira that was approved by the federal government. So moving this amount from 40,000 naira to 70,000 naira, even before the federal government deems it fit to do so, some quarters, just like Adams Oshomole posited yesterday, could be thinking that maybe indeed they truly have the interest of the people at heart, away from whatever political undertones may be associated with it.
There are arguments, of course, on both sides, but this is the thing. We've got the federal government coming up with a decision we've got yet to have a decision. At the same time, we've got an inflationary situation, so that we need to be very careful. Like I said, during the times of Adams Oshomole, I'm not sure the economic situation was exactly the same. And also, I think rather than say minimum wage, I would have put that second, the increment. I would have tied it to productivity. That's what I would have done, because essentially, you would be able to, reduce the inflationary effect if there is productivity. So, for example, it could be for maybe a merit increase in the civil service. So you earn, say, your basic could be 30-something thousand or thereabout, or 40, and the rest of it is based on a very clear merit increase, which you earn after meeting certain criteria. And so it is very clear and doesn't count as something that is going to spook our inflation. I think what is important is that we define our value system to be more, a system of governance rather, to be more value-driven, rather than defining a system of governance where there's an arbitrary. I think that is what I would have loved to see. And I think you've just brought forward some of the arguments that are by no means comprehensive. And this is why I'm saying, in the absence of an overarching philosophy, rather than this is what we used to do as a tradition, this is what we used to do as a tradition, could have been politically motivated for every administration to do that. It doesn't mean that there is some value driven ingredient towards that increase. And that is what I like to see. Economics is not sentimental. Economics is not based on this is what we used to do traditionally. Economics is based on this is what we were going to do because these are the benefits, both from a value driven standpoint, an economic standpoint, and an economic development standpoint. And where you don't have such an argument, I think it is very easy to see that the rhetoric is more political than anything.
Okay, I think we should crown this conversation on the May Day celebration with sort of a submission from you on what you think the typical Nigerian worker in the country should be having as his or her consciousness in light of the many issues that they have to deal with on a daily basis. A lot of commentators on the May Day celebration have found cause to believe that the Nigerian worker has to inspire his or herself to wake up every morning, go to work, and do what they need to do, and then get very little out of it. Do you think that the Nigerian worker has done enough to, at this point, begin to sort of have some level of comfort?
I think first thing that we need to understand is this, that the Nigerian workers need to, be conscious of the fact that money would always go where value goes. That's true of the matter. The world has so changed right now that sometimes if you hone in on a skill set and get your skill right, people will look for you. So I've found situations where people's primary job is just what they do on a daily basis, just to get an identity, a work identity. But their side hustle, based on their skill set, is actually, and more so right now that we have a lot of platforms that you could earn money from. That means you could actually get paid for your skill set, and you don't have to worry about the primary job that you're doing. And that's very important to react. Because right now, even in India, for example, there may be a minimum wage, but a lot of the workers who earn in India, earn money from platforms like freelancer.com or Fiverr, where they get their skill set put out there and people pay them. So for the workers, I'm going to ask you a question. You're talking about minimum wage. The question is, beyond the minimum wage, what value, what global competitive value do you have to put on the table? Remember, away from the government, there are platforms that you could be hired. I get hired for consultancy on various platforms, and I get paid for it. And I sit in the comfort of my home and do that job. The question is, what value do you have on the table that will give you the global competitive advantage? That means you can earn money for their skill set. And that's the rhetoric. Now, because it is important for us to understand that we're not going to do ourselves any good if we just want to earn money without putting out productivity. I think it's important for every worker to have a field reflection on their value system, and more so look at having the exchange of that value for the payment, and that's the way to go. First, it is beneficial for the economy, and second, it puts you on a globally competitive scale where you always getting further and further, and you're known for your skill set and what you can bring to the table for value.
What would you suggest are the specific steps that a Nigerian worker can take? For instance, if they want to invest in themselves some more, away from the routine civil service work that they are used to, what other specific steps can they take to ensure that they boost these other skills that they may have to better of their lives?
I think the most important thing is to carve out a niche point for yourself, because you cannot be everybody else. You got to find out what works for you and what can you do effortlessly. That's the first important thing. So in your sojourn of service, what exactly tickles your fancy and what works for you? That's the first thing.
Hmm.
The second thing that you want to do is to find out what are the skill gaps that you have between where you want to be and where you are at the moment on your niche path. That's the second thing you want to do. The third thing you want to do is to develop. Um, the third thing you want to do is to develop that plan on how you're going to close that gap. Are you going to upskill yourself? And what are you going to do to upskill? The fourth thing you want to do is in upskilling yourself, you must understand that there is a formalization of every sector. Whether you're a cleaner, I hope you know that there are certificates that can actually, that the formal certificate that certifies you as a cleaner. So are you a cleaner that can clean with, do you know how to clean with toxic chemicals? Are you a cleaner that can clean with just normal sort of detergents? Are you an industrial cleaner? There are certifications. So identify your certifications, especially those that set you apart globally, and go for them. The thing you want to do is that you want to identify the platforms that are going to pay you for your services, advertise yourself out there, and then start. And the fifth and the sixth and the most important thing is whatever opportunity you have, you've got to build on those opportunities. Start small, scale very fast, and be known for your excellence. So the two things I'm going to put out there: be known for the guy that can solve the most complicated problem in the shortest possible time. That would be your excellent footprint. And then more importantly, push out for every success you have. You know that success begets success.
Well, I think we lost connection with Dr. Enang there. We'll try to re-establish that connection. He was trying to explain some of the steps that the Nigerian worker can deploy to ensure that they better much get by on a daily basis, away from just the normal minimum wage clamors from different quarters, to see to it that they get paid one thing or the other. Hello, Doctor. Are you back?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me, Savior?
I can hear you now.
Right. So my last point. What point did you hear? Number 5 or number 6? What did you hear?
I think 5.
Right. So number 6 is going to be, as I said, get on those platforms that are offering remote opportunities for you to make money, and do your best. Get your ratings right, because people are going to rate you. They're going to give you impartial feedback on what your services are, and I think that's one of the what's going to put to your side, and that could be your side hustle. I'm on different platforms, oil and gas platforms, and I get one of the highest global recommendations on those platforms. And people that want, for me to do consultancy for them, do come to those platforms, and they get to approach me. Those are the 6 steps that I think every Nigerian worker should put together in be able to identify the skill gaps in their niche point, the skill gaps, and then of course put a stewardship on how they're going to close those skill gaps, and then of course go ahead to get your learning curve across, closing the skill gaps, then get across to certifications, identify the platforms that you need in order to advertise yourself out there. When you have the opportunity to work, you can then put your very best and get the right recommendation. The right attitude to work is very important. Sometimes if you're working online, you need to adjust your sleeping patterns, because your client sometimes will be on a different time zone, and these are some of the sacrifices you have to put forward to be able to set yourself different on the path of honing your skill set, and then getting to maximize the potentials of your side hustle.
Okay, Doctor. The last line of question on this issue would be, the comments by the federal government that it was going to prioritize the welfare of workers in the country. This was the point of view of the Vice President Kashim Shettima, who represented President Bola Tinubu at the May Day celebration. Prioritization of workers' welfare. Now, what direct impacts can the government have in ensuring that these skill sets that you have clearly pointed out are adopted by the workers in the country? What influences can the government truly bring to the fore to see to it that the workers within its employ begin to look at their jobs as not just very restrictive? They don't have to just focus or have a myopic view of their job descriptions, and know that indeed they can have some level of personal development. What level of awareness can the government create to see to it that its workforce also have a way of investing in themselves?
For me, my recommendation is going to go on the line of asking the government to deploy the carrot and stick method. And the carrot and stick method is simply where there are punitive actions that discourage low productivity, and there are appreciating, kind of actions that encourage productivity. That discourage lack of productivity on the other side, and then there are actions that appreciate productivity. Why do I say this? It starts with the key performance indicators of the civil service and the reward and recognition process. If you have a civil service that is clearly aware of what encompasses their scorecard, and I mean that you're giving them that scorecard mandate, you're also giving them the enablers to perform their jobs, and there's a clear line of direction on how to go about performing this work role, in addition to having punitive actions and reward and recognition mechanisms. I think it's going to take shape. This is what the various companies are doing, the private sector companies are doing. The other thing is that we need to have a appraisal system. An appraisal system that does not promote people simply because they spent 4 years and they want to go up. And you have conversations like people coming up to the commissioners at the state level and saying, look, I've spent 4 years, I'm due for promotion. That is a very, very, very unproductive way to look at things. Why not go to a commissioner and say, I spent 4 years. This is what I've achieved in the last 4 years. This is how it has reflected in the bottom line of the Akwa Ibom State economy, for example. And this is why I think I merit an increase. I have a merit increase from a salary standpoint. And I'm also due for a promotion in terms of moving up the ladder. That's the conversation. And I think most so, I think I'm going to advocate for us to start having a training domiciled in every ministry that is going to change the mind. Because a lot of these workers are having the legacy mindset that every couple of years they do their promotion, whether they do enough or not, it doesn't matter. And I think part of that rhetoric change is going to come from sort of training these people. Remember, all we ever learned from school is how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so I think that has to be put into regular training just to have a mindset shift from the norm and have a mindset shift to a very productive and disruptive approach. I want people to know that whether you spend 10 years, I can come tomorrow and I'll put in some sort of value on the service system that will propel me a lot faster than the traditional route. I have no problem with the traditional route, but I think we could spice up a lot of it with some productive reflection so that people know that you could do a lot better and you'll be rewarded for it. And if you don't do up to the standard, there will be some sort of reprimand actions for it, in addition to retraining you on how to meet the targets.
All right, Doctor, let's move on a little bit away from that and discuss some of the confrontations that the Labour Party presidential candidate in the 2023 election, Peter Obi, had, was it Tuesday, on the myriads of accidents, events that we've had in Enugu State and in Kogi State, where about 30 lives were claimed. And then he pegged the reasons for this on the drought in proper infrastructure and opening of roads, and the issue of the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway came up, and the Labour Party presidential candidate in the 2023 election doesn't seem to be in agreement with the Minister of Works in the person of David Umahi as regards the methods the federal government is going about implementing that project. But first off, let me first ask you, what do you make of this Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway that is in the works by the federal government?
Right. I think the highway is going to bring a lot of benefits, but I think we have to balance that, right? Because I've heard where they're having to break down establishments, for example, the landmark beach, in order to, in order to push that agenda. Part of the landmark beach has been broken down, and I think we need to balance it well, because we don't send the right message to, to investors. If we tell them that on one hand we give approval for, the such constructions to take place, and for some reason we are not able to reroute. A road is something you can very much reroute. We're not able to reroute, to take into cognizance over a $200 million investment, and at the same time that we do not owe them some sort of compensation. I think this is just a bad way to do things. So I'm going to ask that we tame down the bravado a little bit, and we apply what I would say an internationally recognized approach to infrastructure development, and where we need to break down some of the infrastructure to build, other, infrastructure in line with government plans. There should be a conversation and compensation, or we should be looking to reroute that. I think that's my biggest problem with the way we're going around that project, and that's setting a precedent for future projects, which I don't like. So rhetoric and precedent.
The Minister of Works yesterday said that it had commenced 2.75 billion naira compensation payments to people who had properties on the right of way for the construction. But then let me get your opinion on his earlier statement that per kilometer of that project will be costing 4 billion naira. What do you make of that?
I mean, until I can compare the figures, I mean, I'm on the spot at the moment because I don't know what the figures are for a typical project, and also the specification, right, that is informing that price. And it's difficult to compare. What specification are they putting inside that would affect the design life and the design component of that road? And because if you're looking at the billions, then that's half of the story. But if you're telling me that billion is going to go into the road, it's going to be a concrete road that is going to last for 50 years, then it'll be easier a conversation, because I can do that per kilometer and I can divide it per year as well and tell you this is the cost per kilometer per year for this road. So without those figures, it's difficult to sort of compare. And of course, I'll need a figure for a typical road that has been constructed, a typical highway of such magnitude to compare against it that has been done in recent times to compare against that.
Okay, Dr. Enang, as we begin to round up the show now, what would be your parting shot in the different issues that have been we've been grappling with in the country, especially in light of the economic realities in the country as of now? Would you say that the federal government still has a lot to do in ensuring that things stabilize? We keep saying the forex market is still dangling. Today we are hearing of a depreciation. Tomorrow we are hearing of an appreciation. But What should the government be having at its consciousness right now in ensuring that it continues at a pace that would lead us to a stability of some sort?
So I'd just like to tell you, in a free market system, forests will go up. So it's the same thing like saying, why is the Bitcoin market going up? Even though the capital base of Bitcoin is way more than the capital base of the Nigerian economy or African economy. So the question is, it will still dangle. That's the truth. But what we're going to be saying is, how can we make it dangle
in our favor,
in a way that comes to our favor? That is, we need to instill confidence in our economy, so that we can have different investors come into that economic space. The second thing that we need to do is that we need to drop inflation soon. I would say the government needs to set up a practicalization committee that is going to look at ways that we can stabilize our domestic prices. Because if we stabilize our domestic prices, life is going to be better. The value of our money, especially when we're spending in country, is going to be a lot better. I think the government also needs to be careful with the basis point that they're deploying to increase, to increase the interest rate in a way to fight inflation. The reason is this: yes, you're going to fight inflation by increasing basis points, but also you can go into a negative economic growth situation, especially when you consider the fact that, one, in the agricultural sector, for example, a lot of the players, they cannot afford to get loans officially in the banks at the current interest rate. And what do you think is going to happen to that sector if you keep increasing the interest rates beyond what their loan capacity would be? And so it is important, that's just one example, for the government to look at how exactly are we going to deploy our basis point increase without stimulating a negative economic growth. And are there critical sectors that we would need to make exceptions by putting in place special purpose single-digit loans for them, knowing that there is no way they can afford that double-digit and in the magnitude of 24.75% that we're currently seeing at the moment. And those are food for thought. Because some economic methods, especially for inflation, is a sort of a two-edged sword. If you go too deep with them, you could actually have a counterproductive approach, counterproductive effect on the economy. And so we need to be very careful when we're deploying this method.
Dr. Wisdom Enang, Senior Energy Consultant, Analyst, and Good Governance Advocate, thank you very much for being a part of Political Spectrum this morning. We appreciate your views on the show.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
There you have it. That's the size of Political Spectrum this morning. Many thanks for being a part of this one. We'll continue to keep the government on its toes as it involves the welfare of workers, the welfare of citizens in general. Don't forget that you can continue this conversation on all our social media platforms, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtvlive.ng. My name is Xavier Robert. And up next on the TV station is, of course, Business 360, as would be presented by Blyden Okembo. Stay tuned.